Hi, I describe here a novel technique of closing an asymmetrically large macular hole by creating flaps that are asymmetric, and I call this as a differential ILM flap macular hole surgery or DIMS. These are the various techniques described for closing a macular hole. We had described the petaloid or a cabbage closure technique way back in 2017. Here you find there is a patient who is 61 years old female who has a large symmetric macular hole which is closed by the conventional cabbage closure technique. Why do I call it symmetrical? Because the arms AB and ED are equal and so are angle alpha and beta. You see here ICG stained large inverted ILM flaps being created which close the macular hole. The vitreal surface of one flap covers the retinal surface of the other flap and vice versa, and these flaps exert a traction which is tangential and symmetrical, hence they are able to close this large symmetrical macular hole well, so that we end up having a good improvement in visual acuity. Now here is the situation of an asymmetric macular hole where you find that the neurosensory retina has sloping edges. So in this 56-year-old female, if one does the typical cabbage closure technique, one would find a partial closure of the macular hole as is depicted here, the probable result 1 and 2. Hence, I changed the technique because the arms AB and ED are unequal and so are angle alpha and beta. Therefore, the traction has to be exerted by nasal flaps going over to the temporal side. The temporal flap has to be excised, as you can see here, and if this happens, there will be a traction from the nasal to the temporal side of the macular hole, closing the macular hole. This is a conventional technique of a triamcinolone-assisted vitrectomy. Hyaloid is removed, followed by BBG staining, and you can see here the ILM is being picked up and covers the macular hole from the nasal to the temporal side. Excess ILM is removed, and so is the temporal flap, so that there is no traction coming from the temporal to the nasal side. There is a traction from the nasal to the temporal side, and that is why we call it as a differential ILM macular hole surgery or DIMS. Standard fluid air exchange followed by air gas exchange, and the patient is asked to lie prone position. You can see here beautiful closure on post-op day 1, day 7 and 8 weeks, and the visual acuity improved to 6/9. So the cabbage closure can be a symmetrical cabbage closure or an asymmetric cabbage closure. In asymmetric cabbage closure, it can come from one side or the other side. The most important take-home is that the closure is by a Velcro mechanism of the ILM flaps sticking to each other. It is important and critical to spend time immediately during surgery to remove all the fluid, and the patient should lie prone immediately after surgery and should lie for 10 to 12 hours for the initial few days. Thank you for your kind attention.